Morena, Katrina, welcome to the Transport and Infrastructure Select Committee. Good to see you, and thanks very much for being our first submitter of the day at 8 a.m. You can take your written submission. You can take your written submission as read. We've allocated you 15 minutes this morning, and we do always have a number of keen members for questions, so maybe just leave a bit of time at the end. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Kia ora koutou. Thank you very much for seeing me this morning. I am going to take my submission as read. It's quite detailed. The foundation of the of what we're doing as making rail work. You will have seen the original report that we published in May 2022, so earlier this year, this is an extension of that report. It specifically focuses on the idea of creating a cooperative model and how that would sit within a government system to create a public-private community partnership. There's detail in the report itself about how that would be laid out in various different subcommittees and how we would engage members of the public, but also use it as a mechanism to attract inward investment and alternative funding packages. I'm happy to go through it in more detail, but if I'm taking it as read, then I'm happy to open for questions now.
Yeah, we do have a couple of new members on the committee this morning, so maybe just take a bit of time to walk everyone through it.
That's absolutely fine. So the foundation of the idea of creating a cooperative model is based around the principle that if we can get members of the community to feel owner membership, then they're not only more likely to use the service, but also more likely to help shape the communities that a passenger rail service would impact on. So the footprint around passenger rail stations, for example. So the cooperative model is well known in New Zealand and very well used. There's plenty of examples of incredibly good cooperative models. And we've consulted globally with cooperative experts in the UK and France and in other countries to really test and challenge us on how we would structure a cooperative model in this public-private environment. The top-down model, for want of a better term, is based around a development corporation. Now, the most well-known development corporation, I would say, would be the London Olympic Delivery Authority that was set up for the 2012 Olympics. Now, it brought together 5 different local councils, 3 different regions, to be able to make sure that they had accelerated development in the Olympic Park to the east of London. That also involved bringing together policy officials from different parts of the ministries, departments as they're known in the UK, and to ensure that decision making at a policy level was just as speedy as decision making on the ground. That type of accelerated growth meant that a development corporation can have a shelf life, which means that once it's completed its duties, then the responsibilities can be handed back to the relevant state-owned enterprises, ministries or arm's length bodies. So that's what we're proposing as a model for how we would deal with the Golden Triangle specifically. So making rail work doesn't look at the entire country. It looks specifically as the Golden Triangle because it's New Zealand's biggest growth and economic opportunity. And there is already significant amount of investment in the port and freight rail connections between Auckland, Hamilton and Tauranga. My colleague Michael van Drockenbroek is speaking to you later. He has a nationwide view as well as being a contributor to our reports. So he has got a very specific view on this line itself. So any technical questions as far as rail is concerned, he can answer. My colleague Susan Trodden is speaking to you later as well. She helped establish TRON, which is the Rail Overland Network, the Rail Opportunities Network, and we are basically an extension of that community group that is trying to organise the community at a local level so that we can meet you coming in the other direction to make sure that if passenger rail is enabled, which we would like it to be, that it is embraced and that is anticipated so that people can plan towards it. Is that enough of an overview at the moment, Mr. Chair? Or?
That's great, thank you. We do have a couple of questions. Over to you, Teresa and Gobi.
Morena, and thank you for your presentation. I've got a couple, but I'll just do one for now and I'll come back. Hopefully I get another crack at it. Hey, just looking at you talk about your triangle growth or your corridor of growth. I'm just curious around that because I'm from the Otaki electorate and we know that, interregional rail is critical really for us. We don't have any apart from the capital connection. So one of the other things I'm really aware of though is the growth in our areas. So in the Horowhenua itself is 10.9% growth over 2.9% over the national average in New Zealand, and that is forecasted until 2025. So just wondered how we sort of fit into that kind of growth corridor plan.
Miss Nobi, I can't comment on the specifics of what you're looking at the moment. I must admit that as a voluntary community organisation, the only evidence review that I really was able to do was on the growth triangle, specifically looking at the extension of Tahuia from Hamilton to Tauranga. The conversations that we've had with people from across the country about areas that also have a very good case for rail is that they like this model as something that they can use to garner interest from the communities and to be able to bring that down, be able to attract the right type of government focus at the same time. So in terms of things outside of that area or outside of that line that is between Hamilton and Tauranga, I'm afraid it would be unprofessional for me to comment because I'd be speculating.
Thank you. Oh, do you want me to ask my
second question?
Yeah, sorry, thank you for that. Yep. Do you want me to ask my second?
Teresa and then Tanya.
Sorry about that. Hey, just my second one was around some of the other submissions we've been hearing, and I guess this will include the triangle or the Tauranga area, is having one sort of national strategy for rail, and if we did so. Really keen to hear your thoughts on that, what that would look like. So we have that kind of one place leading that work, and then also who you would see sort of leading that work if that was something you were supportive of.
But when you say who I would see leading it, are you talking about me considering an individual ministry or a particular arm's length body or a particular?
You spoke earlier about the London example of bringing people together, and they they did it, and then they handed back the responsibility. So I guess if you agreed, who would you hand that responsibility back to?
Okay, well, so first of all, in terms of a national strategy, you would have to pilot a system like this first, and the best place to pilot it would be in the Golden Triangle. There's two advantages for that. First of all, we're already half baked in the Golden Triangle. We've got Tahuia there. We've got the freight strategy that's already upgrading, that's being upgraded in the port strategy. The opportunities that brings in terms of how we can procure new rolling stock or how we can procure new inward investment opportunities opens a gateway to the rest of the country. So it would allow us to be able to say, well, we're bringing this in, but there's more opportunities elsewhere, and it would allow others to organise whilst we're doing that. So you should see it as a pilot and a gateway to a national strategy. In terms of your question as to where it would sit, that would be a conversation that I would be presumptuous to make at the stage that I haven't had conversations with your senior civil servants about where that would be best placed in terms of budgetary elements. However, I would suggest that having the way that, for example, the Olympic Delivery Authority had the Department for Communities, Culture, Media and Sport as a sponsor organisation, but it also had a road to the Planning Ministry as well for obvious reasons. So what that sponsor organisation then does is it can act in a number of different ways, but it can act as a sponsor in terms of creating the infrastructure for the organisation to exist, so that you don't have to pay capital costs to set up HR, IT, and all of the legal infrastructure that's required to set up a new SOE. So you would have one organisation. My recommendation as far as this is concerned is that it would sit somewhere between HUD and the Ministry of Transport. It could either be a joint bilateral venture, or it could be dependent on, it would have to sit somewhere there. It could, I mean, if you take into consideration things like climate change and climate change refugees and domestic evacuation strategies for existing populations in New Zealand, where we may have to replace them, then it might be something that has to be elevated to what we knew in Whitehall as a mission critical project that would sit under Cabinet Office and be reviewed by, in our case, number 10, in your case, the Prime Minister's Office. But it really depends on the remit that we're going to use this, this growth corridor for. But at the moment, and I can see Mr. Bennett's hand is raised, at the moment, what we feel as a community is that the opportunities that could have been garnered by Tahuya haven't been realised because it wasn't set in a proper development strategy. And we think that it could be much greater, and that is absolutely worth taking it to Tauranga and actualising some of those opportunities that haven't been realised to date.
Thank you, Katrina. Thanks.
Thank you. Tangi and then David.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kia ora ana, Katrina, thank you for your time. I'm interested in the Tarakin stakeholder prioritisation tool, and I'm looking at page 19 of your report. And when it comes to primary and secondary stakeholders, there's a suggestion there that the process would lend itself so that unions would perhaps not be required or would play a lesser role within a process. Can you just tease that out briefly for me? Because is there not a risk that without a continual external lens that things can become very internalised?
Oh, but everything would be, as part of a collaborative involvement in this type of cooperative, everything would be a lens from that independent perspective. This is a collaborative movement, so unions could still exist, but because they would be participating in, essentially the prioritisation essentially says that the people who are actually picking up the spades and doing the doing and actually living in the communities become slightly more important than influencers who maybe have a bit higher media profile or a louder voice. But if you can imagine the subcommittees that are listed on page 15, these are like think tanks and problem solving sessions that you would use that prioritization system to really help understand where someone just wants to, like if they sit within a mass communication space, they just need an update after a meeting to say what happened. Whereas someone in a tertiary space would be asked to fill out a questionnaire in advance so that we knew their views because they couldn't attend. Someone in the secondary space we would be asking to attend so that we could get their views, and we'd have to agree any recommendations with primary stakeholders. It's a mechanism that's transparent, that allows everyone to know which role they're playing and how they can play it, and also to make sure that we're not missing voices that maybe don't scream loudly, let's put it that way.
Great, thanks for the clarity.
Thank you. Final question, David Bennett.
Thank you, Katrina. Very good submission and some great ideas there and an innovative way of dealing with some of the issues. My question is around the ability for that cooperative structure to actually happen when we've got a movement against local body. You know, you saw Three Waters, you've got other issues like that which are taking away local assets, and now we're going to give them another set of assets effectively to manage, and that just goes against the policy of the government of the day. Like, I don't disagree with your policy around what you want to do. It's just, how do we manage that? Do you see the evolution of local government away from water and things like that into this as their future role to enable them to survive?
I think that and I'll be brief because I'm conscious I've only got a minute left, but I think that the community engagement, the public consultation model has not changed in over 100 years. I mean, we might have put some questionnaires online, but public consultation needs to be more integrated within communities. There's some fantastic models out there, and a cooperative organisation would be able to bring a lot of those models together. I think whether or not you consider centralisation of government assets or whether or not you consider decentralisation, it doesn't really make a difference in this sense, because ultimately, as a development corporation, we would be assessing each of the assets to their own merits. So some things, for example, like the lines themselves, would have to be re-inherited by KiwiRail. because that's just fundamentally what we would have to do. But there's other assets that we might be able to retain as community ownership, because it would create empowerment, like, for example, rolling stock, but not necessarily rolling stock. Equally, when it comes to housing and cooperative housing, it might be that factions of cooperative housing decide to pull away once the development element is done. The whole point of a development corporation in this guise is that it should have a life expectancy, and we should have an exit strategy that goes with it. And that's not specific to the whole thing being handed in one way or another. The idea is that you would have people from regional, local and national government on secondment to your organisation, so that you don't create an individual entity that then just steals talent from areas that desperately need it for broader strategic content. So that's, I hope that answers your question. I'm not, it's not necessarily in line with the government of the day. It's not necessarily in line with the community focus, but that's because they have to be assessed on individual merit.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you.
Kia ora, Katrina. That does bring us to the end of our 15 minutes. Thank you very much for a very robust submission, both written and in your presentation today. Tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe. Tēnā koutou.